Hi, I'm Dr. Marie Hadley, a lecturer at the Newcastle Law School. In this video, I'll be running through what the AGLC4 is and also briefly talking about why it's important. So what is the AGLC4? To put it shortly, the AGLC4 is Australia's footnote referencing system. So when you have the body paragraphs of your work, you'll have footnotes along the way for the supporting references. And so those references, those citations along the way, they go in the footnotes down the bottom of the page. Those footnotes are then referenced according to the AGLC referencing guide, and those citations will also appear at the end of your document, at the end of your assignment, if you're a law student, and they'll be then formatted according to the AGLC4 bibliography rule as well. In terms of the guide itself, it essentially provides for different ways of citing different types of sources. So there's different rules for primary materials such as cases and legislation, and different rules around the different secondary sources, journal articles, books, newspaper articles, reports, etc., etc. In addition, there's also different rules in the AGLC4 which are kind of matters of style. For example, at the end of every footnote, there should be a full stop. In terms of some commonly used rules, these are the rules that I recommend to my students that they need to be all over. The full stop rule, which I just mentioned, the IBID rule, which is a way of, putting in short form a citation which directly follows the citation above. So if, for example, you're citing a book at footnote 6, and then you cite that same book at footnote 7, you could use IBID rather than writing out the full reference in full. In addition to that, there's a subsequent references rule, which is where you have a source that you've relied upon earlier. So just say, you have that footnote to the book in footnote 6, and then you refer to that book again in footnote 9. You would then use the subsequent references rule, which is where you have the author's last name, then in brackets you have note, so N, and then the number of the footnote where it comes from, so N6 in that particular case. Then you would close the brackets and put the pinpoint. Outside of those repeat references rules, you can have multiple sources in one footnote. Where possible, you should be having pinpoint citations. So if you're quoting from a judgment, you don't just put the case, you put the page of the case that quote comes from. And in addition to that, there's the key sources. So the kind of most common sources you're likely to use in your written work. Cases, statutes, journal articles, books, internet materials. It's really important that you get all over the conventions for those types of sources, because not only are those the types of sources that you're most likely to be using in your material, but they're the sources that your marker, your coordinator, your lecturer is likely to use most frequently in their own writing as well. So it'll stand out to them if you don't follow the conventions for those rules. Although, of course, you should try and follow the conventions for all the different types of sources, even outside of those ones. In addition to these particular common sources, there's also specific rules around how a bibliography is to be formatted and how it's to be organized, what categories the categorization of the sources that you rely upon in your particular piece of writing. The bibliography rule is probably one of the least followed rules that I find amongst the student cohorts that I teach. So it's important to A, know that that rule is there, and B, to follow it. Now, why is the AGLC4 our referencing system that we use in the Newcastle Law School and that's used in law schools all around Australia? Why is it so important? The first reason is literally as I just said. It's the system that's used in Australian law schools. It's the system that you'll be expected to follow in your assignments. This can be tied to marks, although it isn't always. And I think that if you leave yourself enough time to submit your assignment, to check every single reference in your paper, you'll be giving yourself the greatest opportunity to maximize those marks, which really are, I wouldn't say following the AGLC4 is necessarily easy, because you do have to, dot every I, cross every T. It is something that takes energy and effort to do. But if you put in that energy and effort, those marks can literally be the easiest marks in your entire paper. Even when there might only be, say, 5 marks out of a total of 100 set aside for referencing, I think it's still important to take the time to open the guide and to actually cross-check your references against the rules that are in the guide. Papers that pay attention to the small things, papers that pay attention to referencing, to grammar, to the preferred formatting that's in the assignment instructions, those papers, it's really easy for the marker to see that that particular student has put in time, has put in effort. And it's one of those signals that the paper is polished when your references are done correctly. If your references are not polished, if you haven't even tried, to put your full stops and to go back and italicize the case names according to the cases rule, if you haven't even tried to do that, it sends a signal to your marker that either you ran out of time or you just don't care about the small things. And that's not really the impression you want them to be having when they're marking you, even against the other criteria. You want them to have that favorable impression as they're reading through your paper. Outside of these kind of immediate reasons for why referencing matters, which is all tied to your experience at law school, outside of that, referencing also teaches you to pay attention to the small things. It teaches you to provide supporting material for your point. It teaches you that precision is important. It's not just that you know what case a quote's from, it's that you can help the judge, potentially find that quote. It adds credibility to your work. And as I mentioned, it teaches you to be detailed, it teaches you to be systematic, and it teaches you to really slow down and be able to adjudicate your work and the strength of its supporting materials. So they're all important skills for legal practice as well as succeeding at law school.